11 lines of dialogue. That is all it took to change our perception of Deltarune in one single night. Hey gang, my name is Kia, and on the 9th of July, Deltarune Chapter 5 received a very small patch, and hidden amongst all of the bug fixes were some additional lines of dialogue that you can only access via incredibly specific circumstances. Once those conditions are met, returning to Pink's shop reveals new information about device_friend that reveals more about the character than we have ever seen before. Not only that, but it also sheds some light on Friend's relationships with some other key characters, namely ERAM and the Forgotten Man, in ways that completely recontextualize everything we ever thought we knew. So today I thought that we would explore what this dialogue means, its implications on the narrative going forward, and later on, how I think it reinforces a theory that I've had about ERAM since the very start of chapters 3 and 4's release. Strap in folks, we're going deep into the depths of Deltarune once again. Hope you enjoy. As I'm sure many of you will know by now, this cryptic dialogue is triggered after interacting with this chapter's hidden friend, obtaining Pink's shadow crystal, and finding the chapter's egg. These requirements are meaningful context because they inform us as to the nature of what the text reveals. How do they do that? Well, to figure that out, I'm going to analyse the narrative significance of each line in order because, incredibly, almost all of them carry sizable weight. So the first thing that immediately jumps out with this line is the imagery of Chris injuring their hand. This is the most overt symbolism we've had so far amongst the many pieces of foreshadowing, that Chris will potentially lose their arm or their hand later in the story. So this points towards the possibility that Friend is the reason that will happen. Supporting that, this line is also very direct about Friend's attack. Specifically using the imagery of a cat bite, I think puts Friend immediately in a more active role, while this line could have been something passive, like, "Ooh, looks like your hand's injured." Stating the specific action that Friend took frames them as dangerous and aggressive, contrasting the more passive presence they've had in the narrative so far. This is also supported by the line that follows, a line that also establishes that this is a trait that is common in cats, or at least that this is what's understood among Darkners. These two lines are a bit of a bombshell reveal. Since we're to assume that anytime Pink says cats, she's referring to Friend, this confirms what myself and many others suspected, that Friend is not one single entity. I mean, considering in the ERAM fight multiple friends spawn everywhere, I'm not sure why this wasn't in debate more personally, but it's nice to have the confirmation. As for this someone, it's all but confirmed that this is the strange someone that drove Jevil and Spamton insane, and the person likely responsible for the shadow crystals. There are only really two candidates for the identity of this strange someone at this point, now that we know that Friend is not one entity, and that is Gaster and ERAM. Both have very solid cases to be made, but if you've watched my prior theory videos, and as I'm sure you'll suspect from the thumbnail of this video, you'll know why I'm of the opinion that it is ERAM. If you haven't watched those videos, don't worry, the rest of this dialogue is very intricately connected to pretty much every point that I made in that theory, so after the analysis, I'll go over the details of the theory again and dive deeper into just how much everything Pink says here is connected to the idea of ERAM being the strange someone, and why this dialogue actually makes it less likely to be Gaster, in my opinion. Speaking of, in that theory, I mentioned how ERAM and Friend are likely connected to the Forgotten Man and the eggs. In the same vein, considering this monologue's unlock requirements, it's pretty clear that protein refers to the eggs that we've been collecting since chapter 1. These lines reveal that the friends can use the eggs to find people, something that Chris evidently doesn't want to happen because Friends here are painted to have an almost instinctual predatory draw to the eggs, since being described as not too smart suggests that there isn't any higher thinking involved in their pursuit of the eggs and their targets. So if you're carrying an egg, Friend marks you as a target. This heavily implies that at some point soon, we'll be facing a friend in an enemy encounter. What's interesting about this though is that this is not the first time that the eggs have been implied to be of negative consequence. In the PlayStation version of Deltarune, if you collect a chapter's egg, you don't receive the achievement that says that you've completed the chapter without issue. Considering the fact that the Forgotten Man is widely understood to represent some sort of traumatic memory that Chris wishes to forget, this is further evidence that friends, and if we are to believe that they are the character in control of them, ERAM by extension, are at the very least connected to that traumatic memory. Said memory is theorised by many, myself included, to be the incident where the Tale of Hell took Cruel, potentially the incident where Des ended up disappearing, but it also could be Chris and Catty's demon summoning, both of which I've discussed extensively in prior videos and will revisit later in this video. Friend biting very, very hard may be a symbolic act of reopening the traumatic wound in Chris that the eggs draw them towards, but this may also be further foreshadowing to Chris losing their arm, since one bite was enough to deal huge amounts of damage to the Fun Gang as is. What happens when they bite even harder? The exact meaning of this line is still in debate, so before I commit to one interpretation, let me give some of the most popular readings, since this reasonably could refer to multiple people. My first impression, and perhaps the most popular interpretation, is that Spamton was the one that changed his appearance and went into hiding after his phone call, and this has some evidence for it. Spamton's equipment protects against cats, which would imply that he used it to fend Friend off. He abruptly left the TV world after his phone call without consulting Tenor, and he seems to be trying to mimic Swatch's outfit, if Swatch's shop dialogue is to be believed at least. It seems very cut and dry, but I take some issues with it upon further inspection. Firstly, Spamton was initially very high profile in the cyberworld after he left Tenor, evidenced by the old Spamton ads that line the walls of the dumpster that you initially fight him in. Not only that, but it seems that he remained in contact with the strange someone, as the Addisons recall him suddenly changing after having another phone call. He also did not voluntarily leave Queen's Mansion, he was kicked out. The reason we have to get the empty disc for him is because he can't go into the mansion himself. Therefore, you can't really claim that he willingly went into hiding here. On that topic as well, why would Spamton willingly go back to Queen's basement, the digital roots, if the thing he was running away from was hidden away there? As well as these inconsistencies, Spamton is instrumental in the starting of Side B, as he provides us with the Thorn Ring in the first place. As ERAM seems to be pushing Chris to follow through with Side B, and ERAM is at the very least shown to be in direct connection to the friends, why is Spamton then so instrumental in the starting of this route? It may be that Spamton is doing it against his will, either through being threatened into doing so or some other means, but at the very least, I feel pretty certain that Spamton has not fully cut ties with Friend nor the strange someone, be that ERAM, Gaster, or otherwise. He says it himself, he wasn't able to break his puppet strings. Of course, if you think otherwise, I'm open to having my mind changed on this though. The other candidate for who this dialogue is referring to seems to be December Holiday. This line opens the possibility that Des disappeared as a means to escape from the friends chasing her, rather than what we assumed before, that her disappearance was the direct result of some tragic event. This is plausible, not least because of the fact that army rations can be found in her room, suggesting that she was preparing for something like this, as well as the fact that her disappearance seems to have been sudden, in much the same vein as Spamton's. I do have some reservations though. The voice trapped in the code that is widely understood to be December seems trapped there unwillingly. Furthermore, there is reason to believe that this place where she's trapped in is in fact a dark world, specifically one underneath the lake, and this kind of contradicts the idea that she's hiding from Friend. To tackle this, firstly, how do we know that December is underneath the lake? Onion San and Susie mention a song coming from the sea, the Thank You Survey ARG that took place prior to Chapter 5's release that foreshadowed the lake as the location of the Chapter 5 Weird Route had many references to December throughout. And the multiple references to nobody being able to see the other side of the lake imply that when Chris and Noelle walk into the lake, they are not drowning, but instead making it over to this other side. As Asgore's research in Chapter 5 clearly indicates the existence of an old dark world significant to the incident, one can assume that the other side is this dark world, and one of its potential entrances is under the lake. The reason then that this contradicts the idea that she's willingly hiding from Friend is that this dark world is most likely a place colloquially referred to as the Depths by the Deltarune community, a place where Friend is incredibly likely to reside in. Not only that, but if you're a Des Knighter, the idea that Des is trying to hide from Friend is even more unlikely, considering the myriad of reasons we have to believe that the Knight is allied with or otherwise connected to the Friends in some way, be that against Des's conscious will or not. It may still be that Des did end up going into hiding as a result of her encounter with Friend, but merely that she was ultimately unsuccessful and that she has since been found. The only other candidate that I can think of then is the Forgotten Man. He seems to be something or someone from Chris's past, a past that it is likely ERAM is, and by extension Friends are, also deeply connected to. We never see him, and he remains in obscure, hard-to-find locations, and his whole thing is that he is forgotten by Chris after interacting with him. Perhaps then his connection to the eggs has marked him as a target for the Friends, which is why collecting them is an issue, according to Gaster. There is of course more to be looked into here though. After that, Darkner Pink tells Chris to be careful before Lightner Pink regains consciousness, having no memory of the conversation. The only thing of note here is the parallel the Pink's relationship has with Chris and the Soul's relationship. Like Chris, Pink's body knows more than they're letting on to the person possessing them, but while the Pinks are able to find equilibrium and embrace each other, Chris has yet to do so with the Soul. Drawing this parallel at all makes me wonder whether Chris and the Soul's relationship will be meaningfully questioned or confronted in the later chapters, and whether Chris may actually end up allowing the Soul some information, or perhaps allowing us to help them in some way. So that's everything we can glean just from analysing the dialogue, but how does this connect to ERAM and Deltarune's narrative as a whole? Well, to explore that, I think it's worth revisiting the theory that I made about ERAM last year after the release of chapters 3 and 4. ERAM Demon Theory. To quickly sum up the relevance of this theory, I predicted that Friend was potentially not a singular entity, but in fact multiple entities that may be an extension of ERAM and their will. I also linked Friend and ERAM to the Forgotten Man, as well as linking the Death incident to Friend and the Depths, all claims that seem to be confirmed or at least reinforced by this new dialogue. The fact that these all seem to ring true after chapter 5 makes me feel like the conclusions I drew in those videos are worth returning to and exploring further to see how the new information we have may fit into this hypothesis. So with that said, here are the main conclusions that I drew about ERAM following chapters 3 and 4 before we start exploring how chapter 5 has developed them. As you might expect, the main thing that I propose is that ERAM, or Nightmare as I called them, it's frustrating as ever that ERAM is the name we decided to call them, but anyway. They are actually the product of the demon summoning that Chris and Catty performed in the past, something that is often brought up throughout the game. They are not a traditional Darkner, but something more like the Titans, an entity that doesn't need a real-world object counterpart to exist in Dark Worlds. They may be entities that are born out of concept or feeling, for example. Since then, ERAM has been dishing out shadow crystals to the secret bosses, perhaps utilising Friend to do so, while remaining hidden in the depths or roots, waiting for whatever the next stage of their plan is. As well as this, I also linked ERAM to the voice that hijacks the opening sequence of chapter 1, and also suggested that they could be the chapter 4 cooler, or at least one of them, as opposed to just Carol as is suggested on the surface. So then, how does this theory interact with the new dialogue? Firstly, let's revisit what I said earlier about this line of dialogue. This strange someone, as I said, is really only likely to be Gaster or ERAM. I don't think there's anything anyone can say to outright disprove either assertion. So why do I think it's ERAM? Firstly, yes, the fact that ERAM summons Friend in their boss fight is important! Come on guys, why are we only taking this seriously now? And yes, this is ERAM summoning friends. I've seen some people suggest that they just happen to be there. Like, no, look what's happening on the screen. They attack you, ERAM flies to a tile, friends spawn. You are their target and ERAM has set them on you. This is exactly what Pink says will happen. So yes, I do think that, to be honest, this boss fight confirms that ERAM is the person with the hunting pack of cats by itself. Otherwise though, the rest of the evidence is found in the links that ERAM and Friend have to the shadow crystals, which I detail in my prior videos. Very quickly for those who haven't watched them yet though, among other things, ERAM of course already knows that Chris is searching for the shadow crystals, regardless of whether or not you've actually found any. Also, in the same room as the Roots prophecy and the story about the pointed tail, there's a book alluding to wormwood that contains information about glass forming from the tears of a fallen star, an object often symbolic of a demon or the devil. This story seems to be describing the formation of a shadow crystal as well. Basically though, if you've ever come across any evidence for Friend or the Tail of Hell being the person guiding the darkness to the shadow crystals, that evidence now applies, or rather always has in my opinion, applied to ERAM. Now, why don't I think it's Gaster then? To answer that, let me first set the stage by explaining, to the best of my understanding, why Gaster is theorised by many to be the person that Pink is referring to. Gaster presumably resides in the depths, like Friend. Friend also shares a naming convention with all of the other Gaster-related files, which, if you don't know, are all of the files in all caps that are categorised differently than the rest. Gaster has also been tied to this strange someone identity thanks to the fact that the Addisons report hearing nothing but garbage noise when trying to listen to Spamton's infamous phone call. This garbage noise, of course, refers to the sound that plays in Entry 17 in Undertale and Behind the Shelter. I'm sure there's even more evidence in Gaster's favour, but those are the major points in favour. And look, while I certainly don't dismiss any of that as relevant, of course it is, my understanding of Gaster currently is that he's a largely impartial factor in the narrative. He's a scientist running an experiment, right? An experiment on a massive cross-reality scale. As far as has been explicitly confirmed, the only times that Garster has ever verifiably interfered with the narrative are in Chapter 1 when you game over, and if you die during the night refight. Neither are direct interference either, and are more so just him giving you another chance at achieving a more interesting outcome. In particular, with the night dialogue, you get the impression from Garster that him allowing you another chance at this isn't something that he was initially considering doing. In fact, this outcome is so unexpected for him that he comes across as curious more than anything. He simply wishes to see what will happen if you truly are able to beat the night. All of that to say that if Garster were to be the strange someone, his encounter with Pink seems quite incongruent with his actions throughout the rest of the game. While he has so far been very calculated with every decision he makes, this meeting with Pink, as she describes it, seems to have served no real purpose to him. Her identity and sanity don't seem to have been meaningfully affected here like Jevel's and Spamton's were, and her actions in the narrative don't change at all, as neither a result of the encounter nor the shadow crystal that she comes to possess. She mentions the encounter as an offhanded remark, which strikes me as odd if she was truly speaking with the weird-deared Garster. All of Garster's dialogue thus far implies that he created the program that connects us to Deltarune's world, which places him on a level above that reality. As for the naming conventions, yes, it's true that Friend in the Files uses the same odd convention as the rest of the files that seem related to Garster, particularly from Chapter 1. I don't think that this is necessarily hard, undeniable evidence for all friends being controlled by Garster though. All that this suggests fundamentally is that the friends are entities created by Garster, or if we're being especially picky, simply entities that he named and categorized. Garster presumably resides in the depths, right? Where Friend comes from. So what are the chances then that they were just there when Garster appeared in the depths? All we can do is speculate here, but at the very least, the naming conventions don't inherently imply control. We know this because in the Gotta Maker sequence, the vessel you make, all parts of which follow the naming convention, gets discarded by an external force outside of Garster's control. Presumably, this means that Garster no longer has the vessel, and it is now in possession of whoever this mysterious voice is, and guess who I think that is? While there's nothing deconfirming Garster, there's also nothing that deconfirms ERAM being the strange someone either, so at this point in time, the best I can do is convince you that ERAM is the more effective option here with all of the information that we currently have. To help prove this, let's take a look at the eggs, because in my opinion, both characters' relationships with the eggs and the Forgotten Man are also instrumental in determining which of the two Pink is truly referring to. I would say that all of the new lore we get about the eggs in this chapter, and not even just in the Pink conversation, works very well with the theory I've posed so far. It was already pretty safe to assume that ERAM and Friend were at the very least linked to Chris's traumatic incident, if not the reason for the trauma themselves. However, this new dialogue in my eyes outright confirms it. Friend and the eggs are tightly linked. The question now is, how and where do ERAM and Garster fit in? As has been already mentioned, the Forgotten Man is a representation of Chris's traumatic past. Some wonder if he is literally a man in Chris's life that they're trying to forget, like their therapist following the incident, for example. But it may also be that the man is simply a symbolic representation of how Chris sees and experiences their traumatic past. Be that as it may, it's interesting that collecting eggs from the Forgotten Man is seen as an issue to Garster. What does Garster have against the eggs, against the man? And what attracts friends to these eggs? Well, it's impossible for us to know at the moment, until at least we know what the eggs represent and what they're evidence for, as was referenced in Blue and Yellow's fight. Until then though, it's well within our power to try and infer whatever we can about the eggs. Here's what I think. The Forgotten Man is a very meaningful person to Chris, regardless of whether or not he's actually real. In Chapter 5, when the man disappears, his presence leaves Chris with a strange melancholy. This implies to me that the eggs and interactions with the Forgotten Man are somewhat healing for Chris. They're finding a little bit of peace every time we find one. These interactions seem to carry a lot of weight for them, which is why I think the eggs are important, and why Garster might not want you to think so. If you'll remember, it was not Garster's plan for us to possess Chris. That was this mysterious voice's doing. Garster only ever talks to us, not to Chris, and I wonder if Garster takes an issue with us being Chris's body and not in the vessel. Maybe that then is what the eggs are evidence for. They'll prove to Chris and to us that their experiences were real and tangible, perhaps in an event in a future chapter where their autonomy is contested. In a world where they are completely stripped of that autonomy in so many ways, these eggs could be a symbol of their feelings and their individuality amongst all that. And look, I doubt they'll end up with that exact explicit meaning, but I wouldn't be surprised if the eggs were meant to be symbolic to Chris specifically in some key way, and that's the reason why they are an issue in the way of us completing Gaster's experiment. On the other hand, ERAM has a much more blatant connection to the eggs. One could make a much easier argument for why ERAM may be using friends to search for the eggs when we view them through the lens of Chris's trauma. If we consider ERAM and Chris's implied history to be connected to this traumatic incident, which I and anyone who's watched my ERAM theories will do, any effort on Chris's part to reclaim or reconnect with their traumatic past as symbolised by their interactions with the Forgotten Man is essentially them healing from whatever it was that happened to them as a result of ERAM and Friend. I suggest, therefore, that friends can sense the eggs because they symbolise some aspect of Chris's vulnerabilities that they can pounce on, as they may have done in the past. This also runs parallel with my suggestion that ERAM is a demon born of fear. So that's everything that I think the new dialogue tells us about ERAM. The next question I'd like to pose to you, my friends, is what new information the rest of the chapter provided us with. You see, before this new dialogue came out, I wasn't planning on making a follow-up to ERAM Demon Theory, as the rest of the chapter didn't substantially affect my conclusions very much. However, now that Pink's new dialogue has come out and has given me a reason to make this video, it provides me the opportunity to talk about the things that I did notice in the rest of Chapter 5 that are worth corroborating with the theory. Here are all of the main developments that I noticed. Firstly, I'd like to point you towards Catty's festival dialogue. There are a few things to note here. To start with, its very existence is interesting. This demon summoning becomes more and more of an important plot point with every time it comes up, and it's becoming harder to ignore as simply background information. In Chapter 4, we heard Susie mention it in a main story cutscene, which already raised the importance of the event by a lot, and now in the only conversation we get to have with Catty this chapter, it's brought up again in quite some detail. I was weak. The fear took me. I left you to complete the summoning alone. Do you really still curse me for that? These 3 lines are monumental. The first confirms that the demon summoning was something that Catty found scary. The second is outright confirmation that Chris was alone when the summoning was completed, which eliminates the need to account for Catty when considering why Chris is so tormented by ERAM and Friend, while Catty remains none the wiser. And lastly, the final line confirms that Chris found the experience of completing the summoning bad enough that at some point they held it against Catty, making her apologise. The main thing to take away here is that the demon summoning is now confirmed to be something that instilled fear in Catty and likely Chris too, which lends this interpretation of ERAM a lot of credence and makes it more likely that the summoning is linked to Chris's trauma. Now, if you'll allow me some brief speculation on the matter of the summoning, I think it would make a lot of sense if the old Dark World that Asgore mentions in Chapter 5 was actually a result of this summoning. I can imagine a young, terrified Chris completing the ritual by stabbing a knife into the ground, their will creating a Dark World replete with their terror. I've got nothing to back that up, it's just a thought, but the idea of Chris being responsible for that early Dark World that just makes a lot of sense to me. Actually, just a quick addendum here. While I was gathering footage for this video, I actually realised that the knight is confirmed to have made this fountain. However, Rousey also mentions that the knight is only supposed to appear alongside the heroes. This technically leaves open the possibility that the knight somehow opened the fountain instead of Chris during the summoning, while Chris was there and Catty wasn't. But I mean, in actuality, it's likely that the situation is much more complicated than we'll be able to figure out with the information that we have right now. However, the implication here is that Chris was present and maybe partially responsible for the creation of the fountain, and this also conveniently confirms that the knight was there. This, if anything, makes Death's Knight just a little bit more plausible. Secondly, our understanding of shadow crystals has grown significantly this chapter, and that affects this theory. Shawn reveals in this chapter that shadow crystals are manifestations of lost dreams. Specifically, it seems like all of the shadow crystals represent the lost dreams of Leitner in some way. Apart from Jevil, we know the dreams connected to each boss as well. In Spamton's case, Metaton's dream body that he can never have becomes Spamton's Neo body. Swatch does say the Neo body was the embodiment of a Leitner's dream after all. For the knight, I mean, there are plenty of feasible explanations, and it's not hard to imagine that this thing isn't the result of something, lost. But for the sake of the theory, assuming the night is Des, of course she is the epitome of lost dreams in this game. Feels like everyone in Hometown has some kind of dream that has been lost due to her absence. Gerson's hammer represents the dreams that he couldn't fulfill due to his death, both his own unfinished story and the loss felt by his family, especially evidenced by the fact that Alvin just couldn't let the hammer go. And Pink, of course, represents the dream of the ghost possessing her, that she would one day be able to live as this body. And hey, would you look at that? We got to watch her dream like we did with the other flowers. Oh, beautiful. This, of course, leaves us pondering how the strange someone, that is, ERAM, fits into all of this. If they are truly not the source of the shadow crystals, how do they contribute towards the bosses coming to possess them? Truthfully, this may not actually change all that much. The only big change to our thinking here is that ERAM has just been guiding the bosses towards existing shadow crystals, rather than creating them. In some ways, this lens even strengthens the case for their relationship with some of the shadow crystal holders. For example, despite needing Chris's help to get into the bit roots, Spamton already possessed the key gem. Who gave that to him? Well, perhaps it was his benefactor ERAM, in an effort to draw him closer to the shadow crystal. It would make sense that you would need help from someone from the roots to get down there in the first place. Perhaps that is why we can see Friend down there, making sure that Spamton is following the plan. This might also be why his freedom isn't truly earned. He remains puppeteered by ERAM even in the Neo form. So when his strings break and he asks Heaven if it's watching, what if by Heaven he's talking about ERAM? What if this is Spamton trying to show ERAM that he's finally broken free, even if he actually hasn't? And hey, would you look at that, Spamton, the character that's designed to parallel Chris, is used up once he's fulfilled his purpose. Isn't that strange? Pink and Gerson, meanwhile, are much more at peace with the lost dreams of their Lightner counterparts, and are outliers in the sense that they are a lot more connected to their Lightners. This might explain why Pink's meeting with ERAM is much more of a footnote for her than it is for Spamton and Jevil, as maybe there wasn't much that needed to be done to bring Pink closer to the lost dream of her Lightner. We obviously don't know the dream that Jevil is connected to yet, but if Jevil truly does have any relevance left, I'm sure that's being withheld for a reason. Credit to my friend Dan Young for this whole train of thought, by the way. He helped edit this video, and as we were getting started, he made the connections here with the new Shadow Crystal dialogue. I thought it was important to add, so big thanks to him. Chapter 5 also brought with it some developments in the game's overall meta-narrative, which have some pivotal connections with ERAM. Many characters in the chapter express awareness of game mechanics and the rules of their world. Most importantly, Flowery's abuse of the in-game stats and both his and Rousey's knowledge of the diegetic gameplay mechanics raise questions about the ability characters have to perceive and manipulate the different levels of reality they exist within. At the very least, we now know that manipulating reality is not restricted to people within a higher level of reality, like Garster. It's something that anyone with the right knowledge seems to be able to do in the right circumstances. This connects deeply with not only the idea that anyone can make a dark world with the right will, but also with ERAM's ability to manipulate the mantle game, both their ability to damage Chris's body through the game and the way that it allows both 8-bit Chris to leave the game and the real Chris to step into the game to get the mantle. In a game like this, where we must question the reality that the characters and we reside in so much, the decision to make ERAM's fight focus on the relationship between two levels of reality is incredibly meaningful. It implies a high level of thematic relevance to the fight, especially as the whole Mantle game in general was meant to mirror and set up an alternate route of Deltarune, whether that's the weird route or otherwise. We've also learned that ERAM's ability to dance the line between realities doesn't just apply to their on-screen appearances either. Before Chapter 5's release, the Thank You Survey ARG took place, which, if you don't know about it, I'll link a video summarising it in the description, but all you need to know is that it seemed to be foreshadowing Chapter 5's weird route in the emails that people who took part in the survey received. These emails were written by a strange, anonymous voice. It certainly wasn't Garster, at least. Some have suggested that this voice is ERAM, which makes perfect sense to me. It fits with their motivation of pushing for the weird route. A lot of the dialogue is seeded with a kind of morbid playfulness, as opposed to Garster's rigid emotionless structure, which tracks with ERAM's speech patterns very well. And it continues the trend of ERAM being one of few characters that can interact with multiple and higher levels of reality. As one of the few characters with this ability, this also lends credence to them being the Chapter 1 voice. And finally, Chapter 5's weird route itself plays further with this idea of interacting between levels of reality. As I said before, Chris and Noelle presumably make it to the other side of the lake, quote unquote, before this shot of a monitor with the words "Insert Chapter 7 Side B" appears. This is the most overt fourth wall break we've seen in games since, well, the last time Gaster opened his mouth. As my previous theory videos explored, ERAM seems to be pushing Chris towards the weird route, or that is to say, Side B, and with this chapter's focus on questioning the game's reality as is, the decision to end the route in such a way must make us question how and why ERAM has knowledge of it. The fact that it ends with Chris and Noelle potentially breaking through a layer of their reality, as ERAM encouraged Chris to do when taking the mantle in their fight, suggests that ERAM's goal has something to do with shattering Chris's reality in some way, at least psychologically speaking. This is congruent with their existing motivations. It's impossible for us to know what happens next, but the sequence of events so far implies ERAM's involvement even more heavily now than after Chapter 4. So then, conclusions! What have we learned about ERAM and Friend in this chapter? Well, if you're asking me, it's now incredibly likely that ERAM is the demon that Chris was supposed to summon with Catty, an entity that may be representative of fear and one who almost certainly is responsible for guiding the secret bosses to their shadow crystals. With them, they brought a pack of friends, devices that they control and use to monitor people, most relevantly Chris, it seems. They also seem to be using Friend's ability to sense eggs, which may potentially represent aspects of vulnerability or past reality, to further target Chris and their insecurities. We have more reason to believe also that ERAM is not just the holder of the Shadow Mantle, but also the voice that disrupts the Gonamaker sequence, with the possibility that they were also running the Thank You survey. Considering this and the rest of Chapter 5's additional context, it's reasonable to suggest now that ERAM is someone with the ability to tread the line between levels of reality. The fact that they seem to be pushing us and Chris towards Side B may indicate a desire for Chris and Noelle to break through their own layer of reality, to see the other side of the lake as it were, for whatever reason that may be. And with that, there you have it, my friends, all of the new evidence that Pink's dialogue and the rest of Chapter 5 had to offer in terms of the significance of Friend and ERAM. The final question I'll pose to you is, what could all of this potentially be pointing to in regards to Deltarune's future? Well, we can't possibly know yet. I do think Chapter 5 has shown us a much deeper look into what the future of the story entails than I think it gets credit for, and with that, my predictions have, as you might expect, shifted a little from what I suggested in my last two videos. And while the fundamental hypothesis of this theory has only strengthened with this chapter's release, my speculation for Deltarune's future that rested upon the basis of this theory will naturally change with each new piece of information we're given. So while I recite my final conclusion, just remember that all of this is still in motion, and you may come to whatever conclusions you wish at the moment, because at the end of the day we're all just doing this for fun and out of love for this incredible game. With all that being said then, here is my interpretation and speculative prediction for where all of these plot threads that I have pointed out to you today are leading. I think that ERAM will be the main antagonist of Deltarune. In a game where so much of its narrative, theming and lore is underpinned by this sense of fear and, as Sean puts it, lost dreams, what greater example of fear is there than in the possibility that reality as you know it is not real? What greater means is there to shatter a dream than to reveal that, in fact, none of it ever mattered anyway? That is what I think ERAM's overall purpose is in this narrative. They will force our protagonists to reckon with their reality and decide, much like Susie decided that Ralsei is real, that everything that they've been through has been real, regardless of whatever higher reality Gaster resides in, and however he may have been able to connect with our own reality. In much the same way, the eggs will be Chris's evidence that their past is real, that their feelings are tangible. It's ERAM's goal to shatter that belief, for whatever reason that may be. Thanks for watching. But before you go, thank you so much for your time. It's been so fun diving into Deltarune theory crafting again, genuinely. I love this theory to pieces and I've had a great time sharing it with you all, so thanks for sticking around. If I get enough questions in the comments, I'll pin an FAQ, so check the comments to see if it's there, or leave a question yourself if you'd like. I'll add it on to the rest of them. Otherwise, if you enjoyed the video, it would mean the world to me if you gave it a like, just to let me know that this is what I should be doing. Now then, since you stuck around this long, I wonder if you'll be interested to know what Deltarune content I've got coming up. Well, before Pink's new dialogue derailed my whole schedule, I was in the middle of making a complete objective analysis of every chapter's soundtrack to try and determine which one has the most effective music. I study music academically, so this isn't just some random on the internet's opinion. I've actually really tried my best to give each chapter an unbiased, objective review. So if Deltarune music interests you, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it, because it's still a little while off, but it'll be good, I promise you. Otherwise, if you'd like to support me further, you can become a member for £1 a month. I'm working on some exclusive videos where I ramble about my opinions on each Deltarune chapter, if that interests you. And I have a Discord server that you can join to talk Deltarune, get notified of my streams and uploads, and just hang out, so check out the links in the description if any of that sounds up your alley. Yeah, that's that, I suppose. The end card will have the link to the original theory videos if you missed them, and also an underrated video of mine that I think you'd enjoy. Thanks again for watching, folks. Later!